Storytime about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my storytime. Send me on Instagram. I come from a really big family. My mom has 5 sisters and 1 brother, and my dad has 4 brothers and sisters. All of them have their own kids, so I have a lot of cousins. And this means we have a lot of family get-togethers. Every single weekend, someone is hosting a party. We all get together and eat, and it's actually a really nice time. But there's always that one creepy uncle. In my case, it's my mom's brother. He's 46-year-old and has never married, but he's a bachelor. He's got money, so he basically has a bunch of sugar babies. Whenever my family tells him that he needs to get married, he says he'll never get married to anybody. He thinks women only exist for the pleasure of men. When I turned 16, I noticed that he would stare at me a lot. At first, it was just staring. Every now and again, he never did anything really creepy then, but just the staring was enough for me. I never told my mom about it then, not until I turned 18. This is when he started making comments like, "Wow, you're growing into your body," or "Wow, you got great hips." He would make comments about how I was growing up, like, "Ew." He even told my dad that he needed to keep me away from guys because I was growing up really quickly. And because of my curves, men would think that I was a woman. This is when I finally told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable. She thought it was funny at first, so I avoided him at all costs. Part 2. Storytime about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my storytime. Send me on Instagram. When I told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable, she laughed it off. She thought it was funny. She said, "Oh, you know how he is." So from that point on, I basically avoided my uncle every time we were at a family event. When I turned 20, this is when things got even worse. He would ask me things like if I was a virgin, or if I had a boyfriend, if I had ever been on dates. And one time he even told me that he would get very jealous if I ended up bringing a guy to one of our family events. One time he complimented me on the dress that I was wearing, so after that, I only wore baggy clothes to family events. The fact that I had to change the way that I dressed so that he could control himself makes me sick. I finally told my mom again that my uncle was always bothering me. That's when she told me that the world is filled with men like him, and that all I needed to do was just ignore him. So I told my dad everything. My dad took it a little more seriously and told my uncle that he needed to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed. Part 3 is up. Storytime about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my storytime. Send me on Instagram. I finally told my dad, and he told my uncle to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed and told my dad that he was overreacting, and that all he said to me was that I was a pretty girl. What a liar. In part 1 and 2, I told you guys that it was getting worse, but here's where it actually gets even worse. Like I said, I have a really big family, so my cousins are growing up too. One of them just turned 13, and my uncle cannot stop staring at her. She's maturing a lot quicker than most 13-year-olds. He's already staring at her. So here's what I did. At the next family event, I sat right next to him. Every time he would stare at one of my cousins or try to make a comment at me, I called him out for it in front of everybody. I even recorded the things that he said. The fact that I even have to do this at a family event makes me sick. Instead of enjoying my time with my family, I have to sit next to my creepy uncle policing him. Anyway, it's totally worth it though. I'm making sure that my cousins don't feel uncomfortable. After I had enough recordings of him saying nasty things, at the next family event, I showed it to my grandma. I basically played it for the entire family. My grandma told him that he couldn't come to any more events if he was going to behave that way. And of course, he apologized to everyone right away. But not to me, he apologized to my dad. After his half-ass apology, he was let back into family events. I don't think that's enough punishment. Give me some ideas because I think I deserve justice. Creepy uncle.
Am I the asshole for not inviting my daughter to my wedding? I, 46-year-old male, and getting married to my fiance, 39-year-old female. We have been together for 3 years. I have 2 daughters, 18 and 19, from previous relationships. My fiance is a very sophisticated person and has very exquisite tastes. She also doesn't really care for young children, and this has created tension between her and my youngest daughter. While our plans have been delayed due to global circumstances, our plans to get married are finally going ahead. It's going to be a very lavish and expensive wedding. Due to the nature of the wedding and my fiance's preference, our wedding is also going to be child-free. We will, however, be inviting my oldest as she is no longer a child, and because, unlike my youngest, her and my fiance get along well. However, I didn't realize that my youngest expected to come to the wedding. She tried to tag along with my fiance and oldest when they were going dress shopping because she thought she was going to need a dress too. I explained to her that the wedding was going to be for adults only and that she wouldn't be attending. She started crying and getting mad, which stressed out my fiance. She has been distraught about this for days and hasn't let it go. My parents came by to visit one day and my youngest told them what happened. When they asked for clarification on the situation, I explained to them that my daughter wouldn't be attending the wedding because the child-free rule applied to her as well. Besides, this wedding would not be suitable for a child and I don't want my fiance to have to deal with my daughter on the most important day of her life. Oh my gosh! I had to reread that shit. My parents told me I was being a terrible father by prioritizing my fiancé over my daughter and that on the day of the wedding they would take my daughter out for a special day, which means they wouldn't be in the wedding. I told them that they couldn't do that. Even if they didn't attend the wedding, I wouldn't let them take my daughter. This has become a bigger conflict than I intended. Can I roll my eyes farther back? My fiancé and I both think we're in the right for wanting a child-free wedding, but it appears I may lose my parents from the wedding over this, and I want to know if I am the right or not. So, am I the asshole? No, you're not the asshole. You're the dumbass. You're just a complete dumbass. Like, man, what? You stupid piece of shit.
Am I the asshole for cheating on my husband with his brother? Disclaimer, this is not my story time with sending me on Instagram. My husband and I have been married for 3 years, but my husband's always been very boring and kind of bland. The crazy thing is that I was the one that chased him and wanted to be in a relationship. I was 20 years old when we met, and I met him through a friend. He was kind of charming when I first met him, but what I really liked about him was that he was a doctor, he owned 2 houses and a beach house, and he seemed like a really responsible guy. Before him, I only ever met broke guys, so when I met him, I was like, oh my god, this guy could be it. Oh, and the other thing is that he's extremely shy, so he was not about to make a move on me or even talk to me, so I convinced my friend to invite us all out to dinner so that I could get a chance to talk to him. Throughout the entire dinner, he was so shy he basically avoided me. But then after the dinner, he told my friend that he thought I was cute, so I knew that I could win him. After that, we only saw each other at friends' parties, so on one occasion, I decided to just throw myself at him. I kissed him and I waited for his response. He said, thank you. He finally asked me out on a date and it was okay. I could definitely see me living my life with him. Obviously a boring one, but you know, whatever. We were engaged for 6 months and we started living together after that. He basically lets me do whatever I want with his money, and he also helped me open up my own business. So no, I'm not just living off of his dime, okay? Fast forward to quarantine, his brother came to live with us. And this is when things got really complicated. His brother is the total opposite, makes me laugh and we have so much fun together. Like, really good fun. Part 2 is up. Am I the asshole for cheating on my husband with his brother? Disclaimer, this is not my story time, sending me on Instagram. So his brother moved in with us during quarantine. And as soon as he moved in, I was finally laughing and having fun. Like I said, my husband was really boring and shy. So you can imagine, like, even in bed, he was super boring. Like, he never wanted to do it. And if I ever asked him to, he would just say he was tired. So I got really sick of that. When his brother came to live with us, he would make jokes, we would laugh. He basically made me feel alive again. Here's how things went down with him. My husband loves to go golfing with his golfing buddies. So he would leave every single day for like 2 to 3 hours just to do that. So I was pretty much all by myself all day. He would also spend a lot of time where he worked at a hospital. On the other hand, his brother was home all the time. He and I would watch movies. He even started helping me out with my online business. And soon we became really good friends. I would tell him everything. I would even complain about how boring his brother was. One night we decided to have pizza and wine. And between us, we both had 3 bottles. Throughout the movie, we kept laughing. And every time I would just get closer and closer to him. Eventually, I was sitting right next to him. That's when we look at each other and we just started macking on. It was uncontrollable passion and I didn't know how to stop. And we ended up doing it. Part 3 is up. Am I the asshole for cheating on my husband with his brother? Disclaimer, this is not my story time, sending me on Instagram. As we were making out on the couch, I just kept thinking how much better my life would be with him, as opposed to his boring brother. One thing led to another and we ended up doing it. And it was magical. And then every single day after that, we would kind of just smile at each other. When my husband was at home, he would steal kisses from me. If I was sitting on a chair, he would come by and quickly tickle my shoulder. I was living like a full-on romance novel. Of course, my boring husband didn't even notice. I was suddenly happy all the time. One day I asked my husband if he had noticed the change in me, and he said, "You're being silly. What are you talking about?" And right there, that confirmed that my husband didn't even care that I was suddenly happier. He wasn't even bothering to ask why. Either way, his brother was staying with us until he found his own house. And guess what? He ended up moving in 2 houses away from ours. By the way, he also owns his own businesses, so he's really wealthy. He's tried to convince me to leave his brother, but I don't know. Sometimes I think my husband doesn't really like women, but I'm not sure. I know you guys will think it's easy to just get a divorce, but I don't want to break his heart either. But at the same time, I want to be happy too. What should I do? Help!
Am I the asshole for ruining a pregnancy announcement by telling the woman she may have taken the wrong test? My husband and I recently invited 8 friends for lunch, and we were asked if we could also include a new couple, Doug and Sasha. We have never met them before, but everyone who was invited had, so we said sure. At one point during dinner, Sasha needed to use the restroom, and I told her to use the master suite since the other bathroom was occupied. I was helping my husband in the kitchen when Sasha came out of the room bawling and holding something in her hand. At first, I thought she hurt herself, but she said something to Doug that caused him to drop to his knees, cry, and begin kissing her stomach. All of our friends began screaming, jumping, and crying. It was insane. Finally, Sasha tells my husband and I that she is pregnant. Of course, we congratulate both of them, and then I give them a bag to put the pregnancy test in. I will admit, I did find it odd that she brought a pregnancy test and took it at a complete stranger's house, but I didn't say that out loud. Once everyone sat down to eat, Sasha looked over to me and said, "I hope you don't mind that I used one of your pregnancy tests. I just saw them and I had to." Looking at her confused, I responded, "I don't have any pregnancy tests." Sasha says yes, in your drawer. I asked Sasha if she meant the blue box in the back of my lower left drawer that was closed. She seemed to realize I was pointing out that she basically snooped around, and she sheepishly said the box said pregnancy for pregnancy tests. I said, "Sasha, the brand is Pregmate, and those are ovulation tests. I do not own pregnancy tests. Did you take an ovulation test?" Her husband freaked the absolute F out at me and said his wife was not an idiot and can read a box. He insisted Sasha get the test out now and show me that I'm wrong. Sasha refused, saying she didn't need to prove anything to a complete stranger and insisted they leave immediately. One of the couples thought that Doug and Sasha acted completely ridiculous, while the other 3 couples thought I should have pulled Sasha aside to discuss my concerns and said I was the asshole for saying something in front of everyone. Honestly, the whole situation caught me off guard and everything happened so quickly. The whole thing was bizarre and confusing. I just didn't have the time to put the pieces together mentally before asking about the ovulation tests. Also, I found out later through one of my friends that Sasha did take the ovulation test and she is not pregnant.
Story time about how I married my father. Disclaimer, this is not my story time and trigger warning for this. My mom and dad got pregnant with me when they were only 16. They were both young and irresponsible. My mom wanted to keep me, but my dad didn't. My dad basically broke up with my mom and told her that if she wanted to have me, she would have to do it on her own. So my mom did. Luckily, my grandma helped her out a lot and she was able to stay in school. As a baby, my dad would visit me every now and then, but he wasn't really involved in my life as far as my mom says. Here's a little backstory on my dad. My dad grew up in a really strict family and he was expected to graduate and become a doctor. So that's pretty much exactly what he did. During the time that he was in college, he really didn't come see my mom or I, but of course, my mom and him kept in contact. When my dad, or should I say husband, graduated from medical school, he finally got married. And of course, this was hard for my mom because she thought eventually they would get back together. By the time my dad remarried, I was about 12 years old. I didn't have a relationship with him at the time and it didn't bother me. I was so busy with friends in school, I never really thought about him. Not until I turned 14. This is when things started changing and I told my mom that I really wanted to talk to my dad. So he and I started talking on the phone and eventually he came to visit me. But things started changing when I turned 19. He actually ended up getting a divorce and he and I would spend more and more time together alone. Part 2 is story time about how I married my father. Disclaimer, this is not my story time and trigger warning for this. When I turned 19 is when my dad and I started spending more time together alone. Or should I say my husband? Keep in mind, I really didn't have a relationship during my teen years. We only spoke on the phone a few times and he would visit every now and then, but not a lot. When I turned 19, I was living in college and I was closer to my dad. So I decided to reach out to him and ask him if he wanted to have dinners every now and then, and he said yes. The first time we went out to dinner, we actually had a lot of fun, and it really didn't feel like I was hanging out with my dad. It was more like I was hanging out with a friend. We just didn't have that father-daughter dynamic. We would meet up almost every single weekend, and our relationship was actually very friendly. We would make each other laugh and talk about everything. And this is when we realized that we had a lot in common. Eventually, he asked me if I was dating anyone, and I told him I wasn't. When I got home, I started realizing that I wasn't thinking about my dad like a dad. I was thinking about him like a man. So the next time I saw him, I decided to tell him that. And that's when he told me that he didn't see me like a daughter either. It took a lot of courage for me to tell him this. So that's when things started to really change between us. Every time we would hang out after that, it was more like a date. We started getting to know each other, and he would hold my hand every now and then. And a few weeks later, we had our first kiss. Part 3 is up. Story time about how I married my father. Disclaimer, this is not my story time and trigger warning for this. After our first kiss, everything changed. We didn't think of each other as father-daughter. And of course, our relationship began to get more serious. And one thing we kept discussing was, should we tell our family or should we just keep it secret? So we kept it secret for almost a full year. I told my mom that I was dating someone, but I wouldn't tell her who it was. Also, a little side note, my mom and dad didn't have any contact between them at this time. My mom was actually married to someone else and they were very happy. But for me, it was getting to the point where I needed to tell somebody. Because yes, part of me felt that this was really wrong, but the other part of me felt that it was just right. I had never met anybody like him before. So I decided to tell my grandma, and she nearly had a heart attack. She called my mom right away and told her the truth. That's when my mom came over and we talked for a few hours. I explained to them everything and they still didn't agree with me. My mom called my dad and they got into an epic fight. I was totally expecting this, but it really hurt. My mom and grandma were totally against the relationship. That's when they told me that they would never speak to me again if I kept the relationship going. A few months later, we decided to get married privately. I didn't tell my mom. She actually found out through my best friend who was totally against our relationship as well. And she pretty much tells my mom everything I tell her. It's been 2 years since we got married and part of me still feels guilty and like I did something really wrong. But now it's getting even worse because I actually met someone who's my age and is not related to me, but I don't have the heart to break up with my husband/dad. I told my mom about this new guy and she really wants me to get a divorce. I feel like all along I was just looking for the love of a man because I didn't get that from my dad. Now that I'm seeing someone else, I'm realizing how wrong what I did was. But I don't want to break my dad/husband's heart. How can I fix this? What should I do?
Am I the asshole for cutting my hair so my sister had a longer punishment? This technically happened around 7 years ago, but after newly revealed information, things are tense. Back when I was 17, my younger sister Ellie thought it would be a fun prank to cut my hair in my sleep. I'm a bit of a mover and active dreamer, so when I suddenly jolted, my sister panicked and ended up cutting off a much longer chunk than what she wanted. Out of instinct, my sister let out a scream, so I woke up and saw what she did. My parents woke up to me yelling at her and in turn yelled at her too. My mom took me to the hairdresser and I ended up going from having my hair halfway down my back to a pixie cut. As punishment, my sister had to use some of her savings to pay for my new hairstyle and then gave my sister a choice to either get a buzz cut or no phone and no social life until my hair got longer. Let me be clear when I say until my hair got longer. I don't mean that until it's back to its original length, but rather long enough so that growth was noticeable. My hair usually doesn't take too long to grow, so my sister chose the second punishment as she didn't want to lose her hair. That just made me all the more furious, so out of vengeance, I would give myself little trims at night in the bathroom every once in a while to make it seem like my hair wasn't growing. Eventually, my sister got tired of waiting and missed hanging out with her friends outside of school and asked for some other type of punishment. Our dad reminded her of her option, but it still had been months, and my sister felt like it wasn't fair because she didn't intend to cut as much as she did, and that she apologized and insisted that while my hair could grow back, she could never get back time that she missed enjoying her teen years. My sister would cry and pout, but refused to shave her head to get back her privileges. Over time, I got over wanting revenge and just let my hair grow, and my sister was ecstatic to getting off the punishment. Years went by and we never spoke about it again until we had a conversation with our cousins talking about the worst thing we've done to our siblings. My sister brought up the haircut and I casually mentioned how I got back at her. I didn't think it was a big deal anymore, but my sister got upset and later texted me calling me an ass. So, am I the asshole?
My boyfriend went on a vacation with his ex behind my back. Should I break up with him? Disclaimer, I look extremely tired because I've been filming for 7 hours. I'm not sad, don't worry. Storytime was sending me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been together for 6 months only. Here's the thing, we never bring up our exes, like ever. From my perspective, I thought we had a really healthy relationship. We're both really into fitness, would work out together every single day, and we made time to cook together every single day. He asked me to move in with him 2 months after we started dating, but I said no. I explained to him that I just wasn't ready for that, and he got really upset. That's when things started changing. He began making up excuses about not being able to hang out with me, and sometimes he wouldn't even show up to our gym dates. And I guess one of the mistakes that I made was giving him his space. A few days later, he calls me and tells me that he's in Boston for a work trip. He didn't even tell me he was going on a trip. I just said okay. Then I tracked his location on my phone and it turns out he's in the Bahamas. He forgot that I could track his location. I started investigating and you'll never guess what I found. Part 2 is my boyfriend went on vacation with his ex behind my back. Should I break up with him? Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's on Instagram. Also, I'm just really tired from filming. I'm not sad, I promise. After checking his location and seeing that he was actually in the Bahamas and not Boston where he told me he was going, started doing some investigating on Instagram. I scanned his Instagram for people that he tagged. I finally came across his ex's profile. No, I had never done this before just because I didn't care about his ex. Like I said in part 1, we never talked about our exes. Fortunately, her account was set to private, so I couldn't see her pictures or stories. But I did see on her bio that she was currently in the Bahamas. From his location, I could see what hotel he was staying at. So I called the hotel and asked for his room number. And they put me through. My boyfriend answered the phone. And the first words out of his mouth were, "How did you find me here?" I told him I could see his location and that he must have forgotten. That's when he came up with his lie. His boss asked him to go to the Bahamas for emergency business, and that he didn't have time to call me and tell me about it. In the background, I could hear that somebody opened the door and I heard a woman's voice. He instantly hung up on me. So I called his phone, but he wouldn't answer. In fact, he turned his phone off. It wasn't until 4 days later that he actually showed up to my apartment apologizing. He said his phone broke and that he couldn't get one while he was in the Bahamas. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend went on vacation with his ex behind my back. Should I break up with him? Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. After 4 days of not hearing from my stupid boyfriend who was in the Bahamas, finally showed up to my apartment to apologize. I told him not to even bother because I knew that he was with his ex. Then he said, "You're right. I'm not even gonna lie to you." Then he came up with this whole story. He clearly had 4 days to think about it. Told me that his ex-girlfriend's boyfriend died and that she was in need of his help. She asked him to go to the Bahamas to spread her boyfriend's ashes. And of course, being the gentleman that he is, he said yeah. And that the only reason he didn't tell me was because he didn't want me to get jealous. So I asked him to confirm his story. I told him to call his ex and put her on speaker, and he refused. He said that I was being toxic and that doing that to his poor ex would bring up all the feelings she had from her boyfriend's death, and that she was grieving and I needed to respect her space. Gaslighting much? I told him I wouldn't believe him and then I kicked him out. He told me I was being so insensitive towards him. So I asked his ex on Instagram if the whole story was true. She hasn't opened the message and I'm still waiting for her to reply. It's been a few days since that happened and my boyfriend keeps coming back to my apartment with flowers and champagne. He keeps apologizing and asking me not to break up with him. I know you're all thinking I should just leave him, but I really, really love him. And maybe the story is true. He shouldn't have lied. I can't confirm his story. What should I do? My boyfriend thinks I'm disgusting for having periods and refuses to touch me or even have sexy time. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have only been dating for 3 months. We met on a dating app. He works in financing and I own my own business. He's 28 and I'm 22. But he is so not mature. When we first met, he came across as a really intelligent guy. After 6 dates, he asked me if I wanted to be his girlfriend and I said yes. I did feel like he was rushing into it a little bit, but I decided to take the risk. A few days after he asked me to be his girlfriend, I mentioned to him that I was going to get off the pill. I was having a lot of hormonal problems and the pill was probably causing it, and I knew that this was going to make my periods really heavy again. Well, when I said this to him, he said, "Wow, that's disgusting." Then he said, "My ex never had periods because she was always on the pill." Isn't that impossible? He was just lying to make me feel bad. And I literally sat there in the restaurant explaining to him why periods happen and why they are important. By the end of the conversation, he said it was still gross and that he wouldn't want to touch me when I was on it in case he got blood on him. Then he brought up his ex again. He said that she was always so clean. I got up from the table and I walked away. Part 2 is up. My boyfriend told me I'm disgusting for getting my period and he refuses to touch me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's on Instagram. The following day, he called me and asked me if I still had my period. I told him no, and he said, "Okay, then I can come over." When he came over to my apartment, I asked him what was his problem with periods. He told me that it was disgusting and that women should try to get rid of them. Then he started insisting on me taking the pill again so that I could stop having periods. I told him he had no right over my body and that I would do whatever I wanted. He ended up going home and we didn't speak for a few days. He finally calls me and tells me that he's sorry for calling me disgusting. But this time, I actually had my period. So when he came over, I wanted to test kissed him. I kissed him and told him that I wanted to do it. Then he said, okay. I told him I had to go to the bathroom to remove my pad. Then he said, are you for real? That's so gross. Why would you invite me over knowing that you have your period? Then he said that he wouldn't come near me with a 10-foot pole. Yeah, this 28-year-old man said that. Then he told me that I probably smelled really bad down there and that I should probably go take a shower right away. I didn't even know what to say to him. I opened my front door and I stood there. And he left. An hour later, he posts on his story that he's at a club with his friends. Part 3 is up. Storytime sent me on Instagram. He posted a story that he was at a club. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, so I didn't ask him anything. A few hours later, I check his story again, and he's partying with all these random girls at the club. I asked him who they were, and he said they were just girls that he met at the club. I was so angry, I just turned off my phone. At 2 in the morning, he shows up to my apartment drunk. He actually apologized, but ended up falling asleep on my couch. The next day, I thanked him for apologizing, and he said, what apology? I said, you came over last night and apologized. He said, no, I didn't. I would never have done that. I still think your periods are gross. I started to cry, and he told me that I was overreacting. For the past 3 months, it's been like this. Every time I'm on my period, he refuses to even hang out with me. I told him a few weeks ago that I needed him to change because I needed his support when I had my period. He told me that he just couldn't do it. So I took to Instagram and got in contact with his ex. And I asked her if it was really true that she never got periods. She told me no, that it wasn't true and that he was just disgusted with periods in general. She told me that I shouldn't take it personally and that he also made her life a living hell whenever she got her period. Then she told me that he cheated on her several times when she had her period. Apparently it was just like a hall pass for him. So now I'm thinking about breaking up with him. When I'm not on my periods, we have a great time. But I want someone who will love me and support me no matter what. What should I do?
Am I an asshole for lying to my boyfriend about being pregnant just to keep him in a relationship? Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been together for almost 5 years. Granted, we did break up throughout those 5 years. With all the breakups, we've actually been together for about 3 years. I've never considered myself an obsessive person, but when it comes to him, something just takes over me. Here's some of the reasons why we broke up. At first, he didn't want to be in a relationship even though I begged him, which I know was so dumb of me. So he eventually broke up with me and told me that he didn't want anything serious. But he kept on calling me every single week because he wanted the dirty. Instead, I started going out on other dates and I would flaunt it all over my social media. And this worked. It made him super jealous and he came right back to me. Called me up one day and told me that he wanted me back. The second time we broke up, I caught him talking to some girls on Facebook. When I confronted him, he broke up with me. Told me I was too nosy and that he needed to live his life as a single man. We finally got back together. I told him that it was for marriage. He said yes, that he would eventually ask me to marry him. A few months ago, he started acting really cold towards me. He would barely call me and when we were together, he would never touch me. That's when I started digging in his phone and I found that he was talking to some girls on Instagram. But I knew that if I confronted him, I would risk him breaking up with me again. So I did the next logical thing. I waited until I saw him again and I told him that I was pregnant. I even started to cry to make him feel like I was happy. His face turned completely white and he asked me if I was sure. He said, yes, aren't you happy, baby? Part 2 is up. Am I the asshole for lying to my boyfriend about being pregnant just so that I could keep him in a relationship? Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. That's when he started to cry. Remember, I don't even have a pregnancy test to show or anything. But surprisingly, he didn't ask for proof of my pregnancy. He just kept crying on the couch. I asked him if he was happy, but clearly he was not. But he lied and said, yeah, of course I'm happy. Seeing how vulnerable he was, I took advantage of the situation and I brought up marriage. I told him we should get engaged soon so that we could tell his family. Then he said, are you sure you want to get married? And I said, of course, we're gonna have a baby. Then he sat there for a minute and thought about it. Finally, he got down on one knee and said, do you want to marry me? I said yes! And this time I cried for real. All my dreams were coming true. After that, things started moving really fast. We invited both our families to my apartment and we hosted a dinner. We broke the news to them that I was pregnant. Again, nobody asked for proof of the pregnancy though. Our families were so happy and excited. That very same night, he gave me a beautiful engagement ring. His mom even started planning the baby shower. Let me remind you, I'm actually not pregnant. So I had to come up with a plan. You'll never guess what I did. Part 3 is up. my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent me on Instagram. His mom started planning the baby shower and there was no turning back. Even my mom got involved in the planning of the baby shower. So like I said, I'm really not pregnant at this point. So I started trying to get pregnant, but my damn boyfriend just wouldn't touch me. I decided to check his phone again and saw that he was still talking to some girls on Instagram. So I decided to confront him at this point. I mean, we are engaged and I'm supposedly pregnant with his baby. I confronted him and he just got angry at me. He said that if he was gonna marry me and have a baby with me, he would need to talk to other girls and that was not a negotiation for him. Then he confessed that he was seeing 2 other girls on the side and that there was no way he was gonna stop seeing them and that I couldn't do anything about it. But his confession actually made me fall out of love with him. Now I'm planning to break up with him. But what do I do about the fake pregnancy? I do want to make him pay for what he said to me, but I don't want to hurt our families either. Should I just come clean? What should I do? Story time about how my boyfriend faked his own death so that he wouldn't have to break up with me. His mom called me to tell me that he was dead. Disclaimers is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I had been dating for 3 years. Our relationship was really only based on attraction, I have to admit. But the last year we started getting a little bit more serious, and that's when we started talking about marriage. By the way, he was the one that brought up marriage. He asked me if I could see myself getting married to him and I said yes. Now here's the thing. I am way out of his league. Like way out of his league. I'm a 10, he's probably like a 6. Here's my theory. If you date a guy that's not as good looking as you, he probably won't cheat on you and will consider himself lucky to be with you. So that was my reason for being in a relationship with him. He made me feel safe and I knew that he probably wouldn't cheat on me, and he felt lucky to be with me because I'm really hot. Eventually he asked me to move in and I said yes. But after a few weeks he started acting really strange. He constantly complained about having headaches and for some reason would always have his mom over at our place. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend faked his own death to not have to break up with me and even got his mom to call me to tell me that he was dead. Disclaimers is not my story time, it's on Instagram. After we moved in together, that's when everything changed. He always complained about having headaches and would always bring his mom over like every single day. At first this annoyed me because all I really wanted was some privacy with my boyfriend, but then I kind of just learned to deal with it. And here's when things get really crazy. After exactly 1 month of living together, he disappeared. One morning he left to work and simply did not come back. I kept calling his phone but no answer. I even called his mom and asked him what was up and she told me that she didn't know where he was. Finally, after 2 days of calling his phone, I decided to go over to his mom's house. I asked her if he'd been home and she told me that she hadn't seen him in 3 days. But her behavior was super strange. She got really nervous and tried to close the door behind her. I asked her who was inside the house and she said nobody. But I could hear someone making noise. Then she basically kicked me out. She told me I needed to leave really quickly because she had to go out. So of course, I went back to my apartment. 2 hours later, she calls me to tell me that he's dead. I asked her where he was. She told me that he didn't know and that she didn't know how he died. She asked me not to call her again because it was too painful. Part 3 is story time about how my boyfriend faked his own death so that he wouldn't have to break up with me and got his mom to tell me that he was dead. Disclaimers is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. After she told me on the phone that my boyfriend was dead, I had no choice but to believe her. I was so sad and depressed, sitting in the apartment that I share with my dead boyfriend. I called my parents and told them I was coming home. I spent the next 4 days with my parents and eventually went back to my apartment. My plan was to get all of his stuff and give it to his mom. I show up to her house with the boxes and knock on the door. She opens the door with a huge smile on her face, and as soon as she realizes it's me, she stops smiling. I asked her if she was okay and she said that everything was fine. She asked me what I wanted in a really rude tone and I said, I'm just bringing some of your son's stuff. She asked me to leave it outside and then close the door. I knocked on the door again and she did not open the door. A few days later, I go to the mall and guess who I see walking around? My dead boyfriend? I run up to him and ask him what happened. That's when he confessed that he just didn't know how to break up with me and he thought that the best way to do it was just to pretend that he was dead. And he also confessed that he met someone. Here I'm thinking I'm way too hot for him to cheat on me. Yeah, right. It's been a few months now and he's hitting me up again because he broke up with the other girl. Should I take him back? Should I break up with my boyfriend for fat shaming me? My boyfriend and I started dating 2 years ago. At the beginning of our relationship, I was weighing 130 pounds. So back then, he never had a problem with my weight. In fact, he used to praise me and tell me that he loved my body. He always would tell me that my curves were sexy, and I would sometimes tell him that I wanted to lose weight, but he would always say no. In fact, a few months after we started dating, I went on a diet. I lost about 5 pounds in 2 weeks, and he told me that I needed to stop. He told me he liked my womanly body. So I stopped dieting. At first, I was happy that he loved my body so much, but at the same time, I didn't feel healthy, which is why I started the diet in the first place. After I stopped the diet, I still kept on eating healthy, with the exception that every now and then we would have pizza or fast food. But I still tried to keep it to a minimum. So my boyfriend is actually in the Marines, and he had to go away for a few months. This sent me into a depression because I missed him so much. And because of that, I started eating a lot. I would ask my mom to cook me my favorite meals, and I would basically just eat all day. At the time, I also didn't have a job, so that was making me depressed as well. So I ended up gaining 40 pounds. Part 2 is up. Should I break up with my boyfriend for fat shaming me? While he was in the Marines, I ended up gaining 40 pounds. I was super depressed and I didn't have a job and I missed him so much. One day he calls me and tells me that he's gonna be home in 2 weeks. And that's when I knew I needed to start dieting again. But then part of me remembered that my boyfriend liked me when I was thicker and curvier. So what I did was I cut down on all the fried foods, but I still kept eating a lot during the day, which basically helped me maintain the weight instead of just losing weight. In preparation for his coming home, I went to get my hair done, my nails done. I even got a facial and I went to get wax down there, which of course is super painful. I even went to pick up some lingerie because nothing fit me at the time. I also cleaned my entire apartment and cooked him a really nice meal. To tell you, I even called his mother to ask her for the recipes. I was so excited to see him. He finally shows up to my house and I have everything ready. But as soon as he sees me, he asked me what happened. I said, "What do you mean?" Then all he said was, "You're fat." At first I laughed because I thought he was joking. Then he says, "What's so funny?" It's like he was instantly angry. I told him I gained some weight and that I didn't bother losing it because he liked me curvy. That's when he said, "Yeah, I like you curvy, not fat." Then he told me I looked disgusting. Part 2 is up. Should I break up with my boyfriend for fat shaming me? After he told me I looked disgusting, I instantly broke out into tears. That's when he said, "What did you expect?" Then he said, "I've been away for months. The last thing I want to come home to is a huge gut." But then I started crying more and he kind of softened up. He said that we could work out together and that he could help me lose the weight. He then pulls up his phone and shows me a picture of what he thinks I should look like. It was basically some random Instagram model that he followed, who was actually way skinnier than I was when he first met me. For the next week, he barely touched me, and he would make little snide remarks every time he saw me eating. For example, one night we decided to watch a movie at my place. I asked him if he wanted any snacks, and he said no. Then I told him I was probably gonna make some popcorn and if he wanted any. That's when he said I needed to watch what I was eating, especially at night, and that the last thing I needed was snacks during a movie. This obviously hurt my feelings. And of course, I started dieting again, but this time I was even more strict about it. I basically cut out every single thing that I like to eat, and I was only eating lean meats and salad, but very little portions. One night he invited his friends to come over to watch a football game. Instead of me having to cook, I offered to order them pizza and they said yes. When the pizzas finally arrived, my boyfriend said in front of everybody, "You don't get to eat any pizza because you still need to lose weight." I was so horrified, mortified, I wanted to literally crawl under a rock and die. His friends started laughing because they actually thought it was a joke. Then he says, "No, you guys, I'm serious. She's so fat." I couldn't believe my boyfriend was putting me down like that in front of his friends. I gave him the silent treatment, but he really didn't care. After a full month, I started finally losing weight. It's been 3 months now, and I'm weighing 120 pounds. Now he's all over me and constantly tells me that I look beautiful. But I'm never gonna forget how he treated me when I was heavier. I know that I should break up with him because of how he treated me, but I really do love him. And he's back to normal now. He loves me and touches me all the time. What should I do? Storytime about how I dated my 30-year-old teacher when I was only 15. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I said on Instagram. When I was 14, my dad got a new job and we moved to a different state. This was terrible for me because I left all of my friends, my family, and my entire life. And I knew that going to a new school at 14 years old was going to be really hard. Basically starting from scratch. I really resented my dad for it, although looking back on it, I was being a total brat. My dad's job was paying him $200,000 a year. And obviously I didn't recognize this as a good thing. My mom and dad were incredibly happy about this. We got a really big house with a pool, a tennis court, a gym, and my parents were the happiest I'd ever seen them. But this upset me even more. So me being a bratty teenager, I decided to make their lives impossible. I started staying out late even though I didn't have friends. And when I started making friends at this new school, I befriended the wrong ones. I even started drinking. My drama class was the only one that I ever looked forward to and really had fun in. And this is where I met the guy that would become my boyfriend. The thing was, he was actually really attractive. He felt like another student in the class, and he made sure to be friends with every single student. Because I was new, he made an effort to get to really know me. Of course, looking back, I realized that this was GROOMING. No, I don't want to say the word. And then he would flirt with me and I would flirt back. Part 2 is up.
Sometimes he would flirt with me and then I would flirt back, but trust me, I never thought anything would actually happen. And like I said, he was becoming my best friend. He would give me all this advice and try to help me out, but then right after he would say something flirty. One day he saw me having lunch by myself and asked me if I wanted to have lunch with him in his classroom. Of course I said yes. I mean, I did have a crush on this guy. As we're sitting in his classroom, we're just talking like friends. And that's when he starts asking me about boys. I told him I didn't like anyone and this clearly made him happy. That's when he came to sit right next to me and told me that he had a confession to make. That he actually had a crush on me. And I got so happy. I mean, obviously, I was a girl in high school who liked a guy and he liked her back. It was like the best news in the world. Then he told me that he wished he could kiss me, but he knew he couldn't in class. Then he said, why don't you come over to my house later? And I was like, okay, sure. Please don't ever do what I did. He picked me up a block away from school and we went to his house. And as you can imagine, things went down. Literally. I fell in love with this man that very same day. For the next 2 weeks, I went to his house every day. Then he asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes. This is when things started to get really scary. He became really jealous and controlling. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how I dated my 30-year-old teacher when I was only 15. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I sent him on Instagram. Once he asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes, he totally changed. He became controlling and really jealous. Anytime he saw me talking to any boy in school, he would actually send the guy to detention. Eventually, I told him that I didn't want to be his girlfriend anymore because of how controlling he was. That's when he told me that I needed to learn how to be an adult and that all adult relationships were like that. That women had to follow the men's rules and that if I wanted to be in a relationship with him, that's what I had to do. I was so naive that I actually believed him. So after that, I would try to avoid anything that would make him upset. Basically, talking to any boys. Remember I said I had a group of friends? He told me I couldn't hang out with them anymore. He also wouldn't let me go to parties, and anytime we were alone, he would always try to kiss me even if I didn't want him to. In total, we were probably officially boyfriend and girlfriend for only 3 weeks. I was getting so tired of it. I told him I didn't want to be with him and that I was not going to be in his class anymore. He tried to grab my arm, but before he could, I ran away from his class. And after that, he started begging me to get back with him. So here's what I did. I got another boyfriend a few weeks later, and he basically left me alone after that. To this day, I've never told anyone this story. Part of me feels guilty that I never said anything, but I'm pretty sure he didn't do it to anyone else. After I broke up with him, he moved to a small island and worked at a hotel. I'm now 25 and married. Not even my husband knows. Should I tell him?
Storytime on how I joined a cult that believed in preteen marriages. And I'm talking 10, 11, and 12 years old. Now, when I first joined, I didn't know it was a cult. I just thought it was a place where people just praised God. So coming into it, I recently had just lost my father. And my uncle suggested that I come to these circle meetings. And the meetings help with things like grief. When I joined, everything was fine, and I was getting the help. Instead of thinking deeply about my heart, they got me to think deeply about my brain and my mental health. And our teacher, he didn't like to be called pastor. He just talked about the ways of the world and God's plan. One thing I noticed that with his lessons, he would never use a Bible. I never questioned it because I believed it's because he knew a lot about it. But that was a red flag. I'll be back with a part 2. Part 2 on how I joined a cult. So our teacher, aka, was kind of like a preacher. One of the red flags were the fact that he never read from the Bible. And I always assumed because maybe he just knew a lot. So anyways, as I'm spending my time at this cult, they were telling me how I should be dressing, how I should speak to others, and always staying with the family. And anyone that didn't believe what we believed were looked at as devils. So after a couple months, I started back up with college, and I started hanging out with my friends again. So one day there was a block party going on, and of course I went with my friends. Then I saw this one guy from my church. I said, hey, gave him a hug, and he asked me about my friends. They turned around and said hey to him, and then he looked at him strangely, pulled me aside and said, you should not be hanging out with these girls. He was talking about how they were dressing and how they're basically Satan. It gets crazier. Come back. Part 3 on how I joined a cult. So the guy from my church that I saw at the block party, he was talking about how my friends were dressing, how they talked and saying that they were Satan. He told me to stay away from them. And he was telling me that if I continued to be around them, that I would be cursed. He said that he was going to tell the group about my situation with me hanging out with them and that he prays that I stay away from them. But if I continue to be friends with them, that I will be part of this whole demon tribe. And it's crazy because I looked at that man as one of the father figures inside the group, but now I just felt like that was controlling. I told him that they were good people and that we've been friends for years and that I'm not going to go anywhere. Then he took some water from his pocket, which I believe was probably holy water. He splashed it on his hands and put it on my forehead and said, rebuke the devil. Literally in the middle of the block party, everybody was looking at us like we were crazy. I told him to get off of me, and he would not let go, and he was squeezing my arm so tight to the point I was. Part 4 on how I joined a cult. So, in the middle of the block party, he literally puts holy water in his hand, slams it into my face, and says, "Rebuke the devil." And I'm telling him, "Please get off of me." And he squeezes my arm so hard to the point it's bleeding. The blood wasn't dripping from my arm or anything like that. It was almost like an Indian burn bleed. And my skin was torn, which is why I was bleeding. And anyways, these group of guys got him off of me. And the group of guys were telling him to leave and don't come back. And on his way out, he was speaking in tongues and throwing holy water at me and left. I was so scared, and my friends told me, do not go back to the group. So after the whole incident, I didn't go back for months. When I finally came back, it was around Christmas time. And I went back to the group because the date of my dad's death was coming up. When I came into the room of the group, everyone looked at me like I was crazy. Everyone screamed for me to get out and called me all types of Satan and devils. And I never went back. Storytime on how my parents forced me into acting. I'd played roles that were on TV networks like Disney Channel and Nickelodeon. And I also did PBS Kids and a few other networks. As a child actor, my parents expected a lot from me. The roles that I played would pay the bills at home. When I was younger and I was acting, I didn't know that money came with it. So whenever I did act, if anything that had to do with money, my parents would handle it. And still to this day, I haven't seen that money. But anyways, so during my time of acting, my parents put me in acting classes, singing, and dancing. They really wanted me to be that triple threat. But when it came to these shows that I played in, I would never get the main character. I'd always be casted like an extra that had a few lines. When I finally got my big break, I was casted in the Hannah Montana show. But you will not believe what my parents had to do for me to get that role. Part 2 on how my parents forced me into acting. So finally, I got a major role in a Hannah Montana show. For my role, I necessarily didn't audition. My parents built up a contract and forced my signature. In order for me to play the role, there were certain things that I had to do. When it came to getting clothes, I had to make sure I bought my clothes. With the money that I made at my previous acting jobs, I had to make sure my own makeup was done, had to make sure my own hair was done. And I also had to do janitor work, as in like sweep, mop the floors. Maybe a good 2 months before the show had started, I had to get the stage set up and, the scene. 2 months of working and not really getting paid for it. The head of Disney had found out about the contract and forced to sue my parents if they had continued with it. After the whole situation, I never got the role. And I put all that work in for no compensation and no role.
This man thought he got away with something terrible he did as a kid, but he was wrong. Wunzer was a rich businessman. Let's just call him Derek. Derek was walking home from work when a boy ran up to him and started pulling on his suit. He said, "Mister, give me 1 penny." Derek shouted, "Leave me alone," and walked away. The boy was left outside freezing in the cold. The next day, the same boy was standing on the street and said, "Mister, give me 1 penny." Derek was annoyed. He threw a penny at him and said, "Here, there you go, now leave me alone." But he could have never known who this boy actually was. This time when he got home, he started feeling uneasy. Something about these interactions felt a bit weird to him. He went to bed, tried to fall asleep, but as soon as he closed his eyes, he heard a voice right up against his ear say, "Mister, give me 1 penny." Derek jumped out of bed. His wife told him to calm down, so he tried to. There was no one else in the room, but something was wrong. Derek began to remember what he did. When he was a young boy, him and his friends had done something horrible. Terrified, he went up to the attic and found his old yearbook. Then, flipping through the pages, he saw a photo. Derek thought, how was this possible? He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Follow for part 2. How can you ever know what someone's true intentions are? Alice was the babysitter of a young girl with a severe incurable illness. They had developed a strong bond. Alice was almost like a sister to her and her only close friend. But once the young girl's illness got worse and she had to be taken off of life support, the mother didn't eat or sleep for days. The father was inconsolable until one day the father called Alice over. He said that they needed some help to get their daughter's room remodeled. He said that her mother couldn't stand to look at it anymore. Every night before bed, they could hear their dead daughter's cries coming from her old room. But things became quickly even more terrifying. They went to the young girl's room and said that they had to knock a wall down in order to remodel it. So together, all three of them got to work. Then the dad asked if they needed some water. Alice said sure, so the parents went to go get it. But as soon as they came back, Alice was shocked. They were wearing gas masks. They sprayed a substance into Alice's face and she blacked out. But when she woke up, the hole in the wall that she had knocked down was covered in bricks entirely. The door and the window were also bricked up. She began banging on the wall, screaming for help. And from the other side, she heard the faint voice of the dead girl's parents say, "We're sorry, but she needs you forever."
So I had just been dress coded for having a singular rip on my knee, right? And the vice principal and the assistant teacher harassing me the whole time. They make me change in a room with cement walls and dirt floors. They lock me in there, make me change, and they give me pants from the Lost and Found that are 2 sizes too small and dirty, right? So the teacher's walking me back to my class. She's harassing me the whole time, making fun of me. And I get back to class and I'm just crying because I'm so humiliated. They really just like brought me down. So my teacher comes up to me and she's like, "What's wrong? Like, what happened? Why'd they take you down to the office? What took so long?" And I tell her the story, and I like tell the class the story, and nobody believes me. They're like, well, some of the students did. They were like, "What, really? Like, that's crazy." But the teacher was like, "I'm not buying it. Like, you're lying to me." And I was like, yeah, I wouldn't believe myself either. Like, that's crazy, right? So at the end of the day, I go down to the office and I ask for my pants back, and they said, "No, we don't want you wearing those pants again." So I was like, okay, I'll go back another day.
Can you solve this mystery? This is a story about the murder of a group of kids that went to the same school. But things are not as simple as they seem. Someone is hiding something, and all the clues to what really happened are hidden in what I'm about to say. After the tragic murders of these boys, they had to each be buried in closed caskets because their bodies were so badly beaten. But someone noticed something strange at the funeral. He was a friend of one of the boys' parents, and he saw an elderly woman sitting alone, someone that he didn't recognize. When the funeral was over, she quietly went over to each headstone with a smile and placed a clover next to each one. Then she said a silent prayer. He thought she must be one of the dead boys' grandmas. He asked her, "Why did you place a clover on their grave?" She replied, "It's a happy flower. It brings good luck. You see, my grandson died too, but it was a different incident. He was bullied for a long time, and one day he couldn't take it anymore. He hung himself in the school bathroom." The elderly woman began crying and left. He felt bad for her, but something felt off. That night, he decided to Google what clovers mean. It said that they were the symbol for revenge. What really happened here? Can you solve this mystery?